עצביהם כסף וזהב, מעשה ידי אדם. עצביהם כסף וזהב, מעשה ידי אדם.
The greatest historical calamity in the Hebrew Bible is actually an event we just read about in the Musaf prayers. It was the destruction of the temple. The first temple, if we're talking about the Bible, that's King Solomon's temple, by Nebuchadnezzar II, king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in the year 586 BCE. We have a whole day on the Hebrew calendar dedicated to commemorating the temple's destruction. That's Tisha B'Av. But the fall of Jerusalem at that time, a long, long time ago, and the murder or exile of its inhabitants actually took place over many, many years. It took a long time because there was a serious split among the Jews who were living in Jerusalem, a dispute over how to handle the Babylonian threat. Like the prophet Jeremiah told the people not to revolt against the Babylonians, to concede to reality, the reality of their military superiority, to accept this new way of life and carry on as best as possible. Others, like the king of Judea, wanted to fight back, wanted to defend Jewish sovereignty. The hatred between these two factions grew more intense every day until the bigger fight didn't seem to be between the Jews and the Babylonians, but between the Jews themselves. It got very intense and even violent. One particularly consequential episode involved the Jewish governor that Nebuchadnezzar installed over Jerusalem. His name was Gedalia ben Achikam. Gedalia was on the same page as Jeremiah. He was a realist. He understood that there was no way the Jews were going to defeat the Babylonians and that we just had to figure out some way to live peacefully with them. But his belief and his role, especially as newly installed governor, turned him in the eyes of the other camp into the worst kind of traitor, a self-hating Jew, a sellout without any principles, a collaborator. Chief among his critics was a jealous, power-hungry, and hateful piece of work named Yishmael ben Netanya. We know all of this from the Bible. On the day after Rosh Hashana, some say on Rosh Hashana itself, the year was 582 BCE, Yishmael ben Netanya and 10 others carried out a murderous plan with the backing of the king of Ammon, who also didn't like the Babylonians. They storm into Gedalia's palace. They slaughter him with all the other Jews and Babylonians who were with him. More chaos ensues, more bloodshed ensues, and Nebuchadnezzar has had enough. He says, I'm done with these people. I will wipe out every last remaining Jew in Jerusalem and in the Judean province. In the end, actually, he doesn't have to, fearing for their lives, all of the remaining Jews flee to Egypt on their own. The significance of this tragic event was not lost on the rabbis. They designated the third day of Tishrei, that's Monday, the day after Rosh Hashana, as a fast day known as Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia. It's an official fast day on the calendar, and actually the only day of mourning on the Jewish calendar that marks the death of an individual, and the only day of mourning that marks the assassination of one Jew by another Jew because of jealousy and hatred. Tzom Gedalia is not the most popular of fast days. It is the victim of unfortunate timing. A day after Rosh Hashana, a week before Yom Kippur. But I would argue that its timing, if not deliberate, is actually very, very appropriate and significant. Here we are, the new year is about to begin, and Tzom Gedalia serves as a warning sign, like a warning before you go on a scary ride at a carnival. Picture the sign. Caution. You're about to embark on a high-speed thrill ride where you will attempt to share the world with people who are different than you. Anger, division, polarization, and hatred will endanger yourself and others and may cause this ride to come to an end. That's the sign Tzom Gedalia lifts up for all of us as we observe the fast day. And I think it's a cautionary tale and cautionary sign that is particularly worthy of attention these days, as so many of us feel our thrill ride growing increasingly dangerous and increasingly unstable. The hatred that we are warned to avoid is growing, and civility, patience, and compromise, those qualities that are necessary in order to share the world, are in short supply. The high holidays always invite us to reflect personally on these questions, on the way we have contributed to problems in the world. So let me speak personally for a moment. I've been a rabbi in Toronto now at Beth Tikvah for 15 years. And one of the kinder things that I hear people saying about me, among other not so kind things, is that Rabbi Grover is such a nice guy. He gets along with everybody. Right wing, left wing, older, younger, religious, not religious. What a nice guy. Occasionally, my wife will overhear such comments. I can tell when others are complimenting me to her, because when it happens, you can actually see her fighting the urge to roll her eyes to the back of her head. Her teeth begin to grind. She actually is thinking the same thing I'm thinking when I hear such comments. If only they knew. I know how to be nice, but I don't think I'm unusually nice by nature. I have opinions and emotions and can be impatient and intolerant of those who disagree with me. I confess to flipping the bird at other drivers when I'm in a rush, being too critical of other people, avoiding people I don't like, and possessing jealousies and prejudices that I'm ashamed of. I'm sharing this with you not to gain your sympathy, but to suggest that perhaps I'm not the only one for whom it takes work to be nice, who wrestles between his better angels and his worser angels, who recognizes the spirit of Yishmael ben Netanya inside of him, who preaches against hatred of others, but can feel hypocritical doing so. The truth is that unless you are a tzaddik, purely righteous, what our tradition says is you hate, I hate, we all hate together. In Judaism, we call this the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Everyone has one. And it's our task in life, as Ben Zoma teaches in Pirkei Avot, to overcome it, to work to be kinder, to work to be more loving, to work to be more understanding, to be more patient. It's when we stop trying to overcome the Yetzer Hara, the Yetzer Haras that we have in ourselves individually, that our communities begin to spiral downward in a vortex of hatred. And I think that's what's going on. In Belleville this past summer, our Prime Minister could not conclude his speech without being swarmed with gross vulgarity, including anti-Semitic vileness. While right across the street from our synagogue, I have to explain to my kids why people feel it's okay to spray paint F. Trudeau on a billboard. And it was an F. In Canada today, it is normal to have police presence at town hall meetings, at school board meetings. Even within our own Jewish community, our teachers and librarians are afraid lest they say the wrong thing, lest they place the wrong books on the shelves of the library. And in Israel, what a tragedy. Our only Jewish state being torn apart by two halves who see each other not only as opponents, but as existential threats. You know, the absurdity of all of this is that these divisions don't seem to be rooted in significant differences of opinion. Lord Ashcroft-Pohl's latest reports, called Canadian Politics After COVID, found that Canadians across the political spectrum tend to agree more than they disagree on pretty much all of the big issues. And in Israel, a serious new think tank called Tachlit conducted a poll revealing that on the big issues in Israel, including the judicial reforms, about 60 to 70% of the country is on the exact same page, wanting some reasonable compromise. These studies prove that our hate is not rooted in actual differences of opinion. What's left is the Yetzer Hara, the primal parts of our psyche, conditioned to see others who are different as different and threatening. If we tap into those parts of our psychology, or worse, if others tap into those parts of our psychology, we will find emotions more intense and more enduring than anything else out there. Politicians know that. Interest groups know that. Internet, social media pioneers, they know that. And they have learned to exploit it and profit from it by needlessly exaggerating and exacerbating differences between us wherever they can find them. That's what's going on. And so we find ourselves swimming in a culture of hatred. Some believe that we are helpless and hopeless victims of this culture. Ironically, they blame everybody else for fanning the flames of division. It's the politicians, it's the woke, it's social media. But I challenge these passive lamenters. They are wrong. We are not helpless. And I believe we have an obligation at this moment, as Canadians, as Jews, as Zionists, to stop facilitating, normalizing, and rewarding the public climate of hate. And I believe there are practical and realistic steps that we can take that can actually make a difference if we don't want this thrill ride to come to an end. Firstly, let's draw a clear line of what kind of discourse is acceptable and unacceptable, and not simply accept the drift of our culture. Drawing a clear line between acceptable and unacceptable discourse means condemning egregious speech and behavior on every issue, on either side, regardless of the point being made. Of the 43 sins that we're going to enumerate next week in the Al-Chet confession of Yom Kippur, a full 11 of the 43 are sins committed through speech. The Talmud teaches that the tongue is an instrument so dangerous that it must be kept hidden from view behind two protective walls, the mouth and the teeth, to prevent its misuse. Protesting mobs attempting to shut up our political leaders by hurling obscene epithets at them in front of children are behaviors that deserve condemnation, full stop. There's no, but you need to understand what provoked this. There's none of that justification possible for such situations. Sure, there are discussions to be had about all of the political stuff, but we don't talk unless we establish ground rules for conversation that ensures a basic civility and respect, especially for the person we most vehemently disagree with. Which brings me to my second suggestion, which is that we be thoroughly and totally committed to free speech. This is one of the biggest issues of our time. A person who routinely silences others is not committed to free speech. A person who is too afraid to share their opinions for fear of being ostracized is not committed to free speech. Free speech in any liberal democratic society is about pursuing truth. It's about making sure that important counter-arguments are raised. It's about realizing that most issues are not 100% clear-cut in terms of the correctness of the arguments for and against. And as pursuers of truth, and Jews ought to be pursuers of truth, we need to be willing and eager to hear from all sides. The Talmud quotes some 316 debates between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. Since both these and those are words of the living God, the Talmud asks, why was the law established in accordance with the house of Hillel? The answer of the Talmud was not that Beit Hillel were smarter. Actually, the Talmud says it was the house of Shammai who were smarter and sharper. The Talmud says this: because Beit Hillel were agreeable and forbearing, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Moreover, they stated the views of Beit Shammai before their own statements. In other words, our tradition teaches us to applaud leaders who make difficult choices, while at the same time acknowledging and dealing respectfully with the other side. It is true that nonviolent street protests can be signs of democratic vitality, but whether it's the democracy protests on the streets of Tel Aviv or the freedom convoy in the streets of Ottawa, protests can also be evidence of weakening free speech. When the arguments of the other side are not dealt with respectfully, the only way forward is through raw power and yelling louder. And a third and final suggestion, though it may sound self-serving, is regular attendance at shul. Call me crazy, but I do not believe it is just coincidence that levels of hatred in our society have increased as levels of religious affiliation and attendance at houses of worship have plummeted. Each week, good rabbis and good ministers in good congregations inculcate their congregants with the values necessary for sharing this world with others. They instruct their congregants with a shared moral purpose. They inspire their congregants to reach for higher things, never to give in to the Yetzer Hara, but to find your Yetzer HaTov. When you're part of a faith community, you're sharing the struggles of raising children, the struggles of losing parents, dealing with illness, navigating all the challenges of life. You're attending meetings and packing lunches together. You're sitting next to people in the sanctuary from different places and backgrounds and demographics and catching up with them at the service and afterwards at the Kiddush. When that's your commitment, you tend not to start every conversation with how the other party's candidate is a scoundrel. In your synagogue, you will hear about the transformative power of loving the stranger, of giving charity, of forgiveness, of learning, of self-growth, about the commandment in Vayikra, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha, thou shalt not hate your brother in your heart. And you will hear the congregation pray for its political leaders as we heard so beautifully earlier, political leaders in this country and in Israel, even the ones we don't like, even the ones whose positions and values seem antithetical to yours, we pray for them anyway, because our greatest moral obligation as Jews and as human beings is to treat other people as fellow image bearers of God. You will not get any of this on social media. In fact, you will get the opposite. But you will get it here. Ezo Gibor Sheba Giborim, asks the book of Avot de Rabbi Yishmael. Who is the biggest hero among all the other heroes? Not Superman, not Batman. Mi she'oseh son'o ohavo, the one who makes an enemy into a friend. That one is the hero among heroes. This is a time when we need heroes among heroes. We need people who refuse to see their fellow, no matter how much they disagree with her, as an enemy. We need neighbors who want to make the effort to be good neighbors, and citizens who understand the compromises necessary to sustain a country and a community. We need to be aware of how corrosive hatred can be and make it a dirty word again. Hatred begins by creating a rot in our souls, but it persists as we learn from the story of Gedalia to destroy everything else in its path. On this Rosh Hashana, let us acknowledge the grudges and bitterness and Yetzer Hara that we may carry in our own hearts, and commit ourselves to overcoming them as the new year begins. Let's do everything in our power to resist the culture of hate. Let's demand respectful discourse and call out those who cross the lines of civility, especially when they're on your side. Let's defend free speech and be eager to listen to and acknowledge those with whom we disagree. And maybe let's spend less time in fake communities and more time in real ones, because to build a better community is to build a better world. My Rosh Hashanah prayer for 5784 is simple. May the one who makes peace in the heavens cause peace to reign over us and over all Israel. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimru amen.